Okay, there we go. I should be able to hear me. I should be there. Yep. I see my fader. Great. Okay. So when you do MIDI in Pro Tools, it's a little bit weird compared to audio. So I'm going to come up here, and there's already some MIDI tracks in here, of course, but I'm going to go in here and, oh, let me take one step back. When you open this track, it's a very old track before I really understood the value of color coding. So you will need to color code your tracks, but the other thing you'll need to do is that when you open this session, unfortunately, it will also change the preferences. So you'll need to come here and change the track type and the track color so that it behaves the way you normally expect it to. This is one of the few times where I want you to go ahead and open up the PTX file that is in the folder. So I need to go through it and clean it and get rid of PTX files that I don't want you to use. But for this one, you do need to use the PTX folder because MIDI data is stored in a PTX file. So it's not really very easy for me to give you MIDI separately. So open up the PTX file because it has the audio synced with the MIDI, and that's obviously going to be important. Okay, so looking at MIDI. So when you look at MIDI, there's actually a couple different things to be aware of. When you go to make a new track and you pull this down, you're going to have a couple different options in here. You've actually got a MIDI track and an instrument track. I'm actually going to make an aux input here, followed by a MIDI track, followed by an instrument track. So there's three things that are about to show up here, and I'll explain why here in a second. Okay, so let's back out. So right here, I'm going to move them all the way to the end just to make life easy. Although I know that my window's in the way, so let me pull this over. And we'll do that. Okay, so you have an auxiliary input, a MIDI input. I'm actually going to change the order slightly. MIDI input, auxiliary input, and an instrument input. So the MIDI track exists because this is how you used to have to do it in Pro Tools. Let me say this the other way. So an instrument track is what you want to use for MIDI. Well, an instrument track is what you want to use for a virtual instrument when you're working with MIDI. Okay? So an instrument track is actually both MIDI and audio combined into one track. If you come to the top, it doesn't look any different until we come all the way over here. And I pull this down, and I'm going to add the instruments control option to my mix window. By the way, if you see this, mic preamps doesn't mean anything unless you own the Avid mic preamps and you can control them remotely. But honestly, I've never even used the Avid mic preamps, and I don't hear that they're any good. So you'll never need this. It doesn't do anything for any other mic pre's. The instrument is going to be something we're going to need. Heat is a plug-in thing that I don't think we have over at Otterbein, so don't worry about that either. Okay, so what happens now is if I go to the top, you'll notice that instrument tracks now have this area here. Now this area here is all of my MIDI inputs and outputs. So if I hit on my input here, it's going to tell me that I can use the Oxygen 49, which is the keyboard controller. It's out of frame. It's right here. You probably just heard it make a noise. And I can decide what channel it's coming in from. All channels is usually the easiest thing. John, when you open up stuff at school, you should have a couple different options here. You should have the PC88, maybe the Drumcats. I think it's either the D50 or the DX7 might be showing up there too. So maybe not. Maybe at least the PC88 should be there, right? Just pausing a second to see if I can see you nodding at all. If it's not showing up in there, then I need to go back up and do some reprogramming when I'm there tomorrow.
I'm confused where you got to get to that.
Oh, okay. So again, you should have an instrument track. Even if you didn't make one, there's a couple of them here that should have an instrument section. If you click here, bottom left corner of the mix window, you need to click on, that needs to be checked so that you can see the instrument section of the track at the very top. And then the pull down menu is right here. And that's what it should be under predefined. So the PC-88's in there. Cool, good. The PC-88 is the big keyboard to your right, the big black one, the 88 key. It's weighted, it's touch sensitive, it's velocity sensitive. It's actually the best one to use to record MIDI with if you're a piano player. Even if you want to reach over and just hit a key, it's actually probably the most useful one we have. I've only got one keyboard controller here. We don't have a whole MIDI setup here. I set this up, and then in my inserts, I go to my plugins. Shoot. Okay, if it is not in there, then I'll fix that tomorrow. It'll be up there. It'll be up there on Thursday. I will fix that tomorrow. Or late tonight if I get a chance to get up there. Okay, so the instrument, so yeah, you can still follow along as much as you can here. So the instrument here, I can pick what instrument I want to use. Now, we should have the Mini Grand. Okay, the Mini Grand I'm pretty sure is good up there. Apparently I forgot to load the samples for this Mini Grand, so I'm going to not use that Mini Grand. I will use, I'll put in the organ. I know the organ works on this. There we go. So there's the organ that comes with Pro Tools, the DB33. And of course I can play the keys here if I really want to. Very ineffective way to, obviously a very ineffective way to play anything. But you can make sound there and make sure you got sound. Now, if I set this to the Oxygen 49 as my inputs, you're going to notice that the next little thing there actually clicks. It automatically selects the first instrument that I inserted. So that's really helpful. So now, I'm going to get rid of me in the corner for a quick second. Okay, you can see me in the corner with the keyboard. So now that it's set up that way, you're going to notice that I'm not playing an organ sound right now, though. There's a reason for that. If I click record, now I'm playing the organ sound. So if I'm not in record mode, I'm playing something else. I'm actually playing the string track. There's a reason for that. We'll come back to that. But for now, what I want you to realize is that we have a MIDI instrument inputs. We have a source to that MIDI instrument. I'm sorry, we have a destination for that. The instrument is here. The instrument here puts out audio. So the cool thing about this is, let me drop my octave real quick. Once you have an instrument in here as a plugin, you can go and do all the stuff that you're used to doing from here. So you've got your instrument first, and then everything below it makes sound, and you can add plugins like you would to any other audio track. So it's really, really helpful that puts everything in one track for you. Now, there is one thing, though, that you need to be aware of, that since the sound originates from the instruments, if I move this here and I put a plug in here, it does nothing. right? Because all the sound originates from here. So if I put something here, it doesn't do a damn thing. The other thing you have to be aware of is that if I were to come in here, let's say I wanted to try out vacuum, which is a different keyboard. Notice that I'm playing the keyboard and nothing is happening. Why? Because the organ is trying to play, but there is another instrument in its way. Okay? I have two options at this point. I can either right-click and make the one that's in the way inactive, and then I get my organ back. Or, if I really do want the vacuum plug-in, I can come up here, and now it's one of my options. It's under the, let me move it so it's not under the screen here. See, now it's one of my options. So now I changed it so my MIDI input is playing this one. Sorry about that. It's always, I always forget how freaking loud this plugin is. Let me pull that back a little bit. So this can be useful when you're auditioning different sounds and you're trying different things out, but you have to remember that the last instrument in the chain is the only one that can make sound. So you have to either make anything after it inactive, and the other thing you have to pay attention to is which plugin you are actually controlling with your MIDI input, right? Because again, I set myself back to the organ. So make sure you're aware of that. So let's leave it on the organ because vacuum tends to be pretty loud and annoying. Okay? And I could put EQ, I could put compressors, I could put all sorts of stuff after this. I just put an echo in there because it was obvious. So that's how you would control your sounds there. Now, if you come over here, we already have a couple plugins in here for this track. You can change these for this track. So you actually get to do a little bit of production on this track by deciding what the keyboard sounds are. So we'll get to that here in a second. So you have your instrument track. You have to choose your MIDI instrument inputs. You have to choose where it goes, and then it will play this back. Now, when you are actually playing back a track, none of this, well, the input obviously doesn't really matter because it's playing back from the recording that you've made of MIDI. Okay. Now let's talk about the question of if I turn off the record arm, why does it play a different track? Because in Pro Tools, in your preferences, and you talk about MIDI, there's an option in here, default through instruments. Okay? So the default through instrument means that if no MIDI tracks are armed, it's basically saying if you didn't arm any tracks and you haven't told me that you want to record anything, which keyboard should I be playing for you? Right? So that's what it's basically. It's like, which keyboard do you want me to play? Because I know you're going to want to hear what you're doing. So the default through instrument defines what instrument plays if I haven't selected anything at the time. So if you are in the studio and you go to play the keyboard and it's not the sound you expect, double check and make sure that you've actually got the track record armed on the track with the plugin that you want to play. If you really want to, you can actually go in here and you can have it do a couple things. Follows first selected MIDI track is usually, actually, I believe this is what the preset was. It's just that this is the first selected MIDI track, so therefore it opened for that. So you have the ability to change that if you want the default to be something else. But for now, that's why when I play it, it's playing Expand 2. Expand 2 is the name of the plugin, and then number 1 on the first track is the one it's playing. So that's why it plays something different than what I'm actually trying to work on over here. And again, if I arm it, then I'm back to playing the organ. So that confuses a lot of people. Make sure you pay attention to that. So that's the way that everybody works these days. And that's actually the way that all of these MIDI tracks are. So I did want to just point out, because especially since you guys are working in that studio, let's say that you're working in there and you want to record the DX7, which is one of the keyboards that is in that studio. Apparently I've turned off my I/O. Let me turn that back on real quick. Now, obviously, the keyboards we have in the studio are not plugins, so we can't just drop them on a track. What we would have to do is this part window right here, which is normally our analog input and output, is our MIDI inputs and outputs. So this right here on a MIDI track is exactly the same as this is. MIDI input, MIDI output. MIDI input, MIDI output. Okay? Now, so what's this? This is your analog output because this track is making sound. It will always default to no input because you can't bring an input into a MIDI track. Okay? So there's no reason to have an analog input on a MIDI track, on an instrument track. So your output is an analog output, so it can make sound. A MIDI track is just data, so it doesn't make sound. So the I/O is just your MIDI in and out. So what happens then? Well, this would be, again, we don't have external devices here, but in the studio at Otterbein, the input, you would choose your keyboard, whichever one you're going to use it to play with, which will be the PC-88 most of the time. And then your output will also be another list that'll be in this list. And what you should have is you should have a list at Otterbein that says PC-88, DX7, D50, Roland drum pad, and I want to say there's one more thing in there, but I can't remember what it would be. If you want sounds out of those things, you would select those as the destination. The output of those would come through the small mixer that is on the desk, and the output of that mixer would comes into inputs 7 and 8, analog inputs 7 and 8 on the console, on the interface. Okay? So then the next thing I would do is I would come to this auxiliary input that I made, and I can have the input be, obviously I'm not in the same studio. Your list here will show you an option for, and you would make a stereo input. Your option would say analog in 7/8, and you would select that. And then you would hear the MIDI would be fed out to the keyboard would play, and the audio from that keyboard would return right here. Okay? That is the old school way of doing it. That is how it used to be done. The MIDI, so you can look at this and say, why would I bother doing that? First off, if you have physical MIDI stuff externally, and you have an old session or if you have an old session that did it this way, even if it was a plugin, you could still do it this way, where the MIDI could actually feed out to a plugin in the aux track, and then it acts the same as the rest of all this stuff on the instrument track. So if you're going to use the keyboards in the studio at the school, you're going to have to do the MIDI/aux idea here. But if you want to do it with virtual instruments, which honestly is how most people work these days, you can use the instrument track. Okay? I'm going to hold off and make sure that makes sense first, because this can be really confusing. So I'm going to jump back to the chat for confirmation that we're okay. Just make it. Making sense so far?
One thing that I wanted to note is the analog 7 and 8.
quieter?
I'm turning on the actual mic because I just normally have it muted. Okay. Yeah, it's doing this. Okay, it's coming Okay, I think I figured out which one it's coming from. There's an annoying, like, high-pitched buzz coming from 7 and 8 on the actual mixer itself.
What's plugged into 7 and 8?
I cannot tell.
Is it if you look on the connectors at the top, it should say is 7 and 8 the RCA inputs? Because I may have one of those RCA adapters with an 1/8-inch connector for you to plug iPods and laptops into, and that could be what's making that noise.
It doesn't look like it.
Okay, I gotta come up there again tomorrow to do some fab recordings, so I'll jump up there and take another peek.
Yeah, because just anytime you turn up 7 and 8, that high pitch frequency works, but it seems turning that down is fixing the problem.
Okay. Gremlins. Always studio gremlins. The great thing about things being analog and being physical outside the box is that you get to touch them and that you kind of get some very groovy sounds that might not be replicated in software. The downside is you have to troubleshoot all of the signal flow, noise issues, bad cables. So there's a trade-off to that stuff. But okay, cool. Does the rest of it make sense? Then I'm going to keep moving on. Okay, cool. So we're back here. We've got this. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these for now. Actually, no. You know what? I'm just going to make them inactive just so they don't do anything that is... they don't act up on me when I least expect them to. Okay, so there we go. So I'm going to go back to the stuff that exists in the track. Okay, so I have these MIDI tracks here. And we're going to come up here, and this is all the stuff we already talked about. Now, I'm going to pull down this instrument thing here again, and see how it says predefined, and it says oxygen 49. And then it's got these options. These are actually not MIDI inputs. I don't know why it gives me this as an option. But anyway, I can play it with this keyboard. And like I said, at the Otterbein Studio, there should be a lot more options there than there are here for potential keyboards to use. So where does it get this information? That, if you have a Mac, comes from a totally different app. So we're going to go to the Applications folder, and we're going to scroll down. If you've got a Mac, you can follow along. Double-click on Utilities, and you want Audio and MIDI Setup. By default, it usually opens up the audio devices, I think. I can't remember which one is the default. But anyway, I don't want that window. I want the MIDI Studio window, which is this guy. So if you open that up on the Mac in the studio, you're going to see you should see a whole bunch of other things. You should see little icons representing pretty much every keyboard we have in there. Since I put that device here, that is why it shows up here. Okay? So that's one odd thing. Your setup for MIDI doesn't happen. Your setup for MIDI in Pro Tools doesn't happen in Pro Tools. It actually happens in your Applications folder. It actually happens in your MIDI setup window for the Mac OS. Oh, see, this is why Wave SoundGrid shows up in the MIDI Studio when it really shouldn't. As a matter of fact, you know what? I don't think it'll let me get rid of it. I think it just assumes that it is something. Yeah, it won't let me get rid of it. This interface, the Wave SoundGrid has some interfaces that have MIDI ports on them, but the one we own doesn't have a MIDI port, so that's why this is totally useless. but I can't get it out of the MIDI studio in the thing. And whatever, it's not really a deal breaker. So yeah, that's how you populate that menu right there. So that's what's working there. Okay, so now that we've got some stuff here, let's check this mix out a little bit. There's a decent number of, there's 4 MIDI tracks in here. And I need to, since my Mini Grand is not working, it's saying that it doesn't have the, I believe it works in, I'm pretty sure I checked this already at Otterbein. It should be there. When I reinstalled this recently, I must have forgotten to put the piano samples back in there. So we have the Grand Rhapsody piano. We have a different piano available. Still a piano. This is the Waves piano, if you're wondering. But a piano's a piano as far as I'm concerned for our purposes right now. There we go. So I just swapped it out. Okay, so let me solo these out, and you can see what our MIDI tracks are for this particular tune. It starts off with a very simple piano part. Actually, I'll just go ahead and put it with everything. Okay, and so on and so forth. So you have a piano that's very dry sounding. Obviously, it could definitely use, there's a couple things it could use. It's a little jerky because there's space in between every note. It's also pretty, it just kind of lame sounding right now, right? So I could obviously add reverb. I could obviously do a couple other things, but in processing. But there's also some things I can do that additionally that you can't do to audio. MIDI is data. Every little thing you're seeing here. Oh, and I'm going to switch from clips to notes so that now I can actually see the notes. And I'm actually going to make this particular track giant so I can see what's going on. Every single one of these dots here represents a note. And it represents the note length. Okay? For those of you that play keyboard or are comfortable enough with music to read to know what keys a piano indicates, if you look over to the side here, you can actually see the key for the piano. Okay? So for instance, this one is a C, right? And this would be their C sharp, but there are no C sharps because the tune's in C. So that's how you figure out what these are. And the length represents how long that key was held down. So one of the first things that I just mentioned is that it feels a little jerky because there's a lot of space between notes. Not so bad here. See, a little jerky there. One of the things I can do is I can go in here and I can highlight every note, and this is going to sound funny. Small joys. It's always kind of fun to do that. But now that I've selected all of them, if I carefully go over here, I go to the end of one of the notes, you'll notice that my trim tool shows up. Since I have all of these highlighted, let me zoom in so I don't overdo this. Since I have all of these highlighted, I can actually change the length of each one. I'm in grid mode. I need to be in slip mode. That's why they're all popping at different. Let's undo that. Now they're popping at different things. But see, I can actually change the overall length of every single note that's in here, all at the same time. So, to use a musical term, now this piano part should be more legato than it was. Right? Versus this. Right? So instead of those breaks, now I've just gone in here and I've made it more. So you can do all sorts of stuff to this. You can actually modify individual notes in MIDI. You can't do that in audio, obviously. If somebody plays a chord, you're stuck with all of those. But if I don't like this chord, I'm going to click out of it so I'm not selected on all of them. If I don't like this chord, I can grab this, move it, and the first chord is now... Right? So I can do all sorts of stuff to this performance. And I can really modify it to really do exactly what I want it to do. So I can change chords, I can change notes, I can change where the note is, I can do all sorts of stuff like that. Something else you can do with these is that you can notice how some of these notes don't start right on the line. Some of them do. Some of these do. Most of these do. Pretty tight piano player, so it wasn't too far off. Yeah, see how these aren't quite exactly together? Yeah, it was a pretty straight ahead piano player. Didn't do a ton. You're not going to notice a bunch. But there's just a couple discrepancies in the timing. Right? That's fine. That's actually makes it sound human. But let's say that you don't want this piano part to sound human, and you definitely want it to be very exactly the way you want it to be. So I'm playing that game again. Since this is data. The datas are referred to as events. It's not audio, it's event. These are events. Because of that, the event menu gives you a bunch of options for this. So the event menu, let's go to some event operations. Quantize is probably one of the most used ones that you're going to see. So I can choose quantize, and it's going to pop up with this window right here. Now, I can tell it that I want it to put, I don't want that on right now. I can tell it that I want it to put every note perfectly on the downbeat. And if I choose apply, watch all of these notes over here. See how they adjusted ever so slightly? Now all of these will fit perfectly in time. You could argue that it's a little less human sounding, so I'm going to undo that with the Command Z. So let's say I want it to have a little bit more vibe. That's what the randomize is for. So what it'll do is it'll take notes that are way out of line and it'll get them closer to the bar line, but it might not exactly put it exactly where it goes. So you can tighten a performance but still keep some of the human element to it by randomizing the quantize. So when I quantize this, these dots are all going to move again, but they're not going to snap perfectly to where they were. It's tough to see a difference, but I can kind of see some places. Like right there, it's still a little bit in front of the beat, which is fine, because we're tightened up enough that a little bit of that just makes it feel real. It's very subtle, but it's just enough to make it not feel like a computer is playing the keyboard, which is really nice. I wouldn't be careful. You can try messing with this if you want. Command Z is your best friend. You can undo this stuff. This section right here is supposed to feel like it's slowed down, so that's why this one's a little out of time. Right? That's supposed to feel a little out of time. So you can... I shouldn't say it's supposed to, but it did. That's the way it was played. If you think it feels better if it is in time, and you're working on it, knock yourself out. Go for it. You're welcome to change a couple notes. I want you to play with this. I want you to get used to what MIDI can do. Now, there's a lot more you can do than just notes with MIDI. So one of the things you can do with a keyboard is you can play a key, right? You can play something. Now, this keyboard doesn't have the option, but the PC-88, the big keyboard in the studio, does. You can play a chord, and then you can push harder afterwards. That's what's called aftertouch. And if the keyboard gives you the ability to sense aftertouch, the tone may change if you play the keys harder. And I believe the PC-88 allows you to do that. So like you can play a chord and then lean into it just a little bit and it'll get brighter sounding or it'll get louder or something like that. So that's one thing you can control. If I go here, for example, there it is, Aftertouch. This keyboard doesn't have Aftertouch, so there's nothing in there. Another thing you can do is every keyboard can sense the velocity. How hard did I hit those keys? When I hit that, it gives me all of these little, I call them stems, little trees, if you want to call it that. Every single key is the strength in which you hit every single key is represented by these little diamonds here. So I can grab any one of these and make a note louder or softer. So if you've got a note that's sticking out that's bothering you, go to the velocity page and you can find that note and make it quieter. So it's really useful for that. Now, you're probably wondering, maybe, or maybe you're not, that's fine too. You can also quantize the velocity so that there's less difference in the levels. So I can change velocity. Similar window, change the velocity of the note on. I can set them all to 100% if I just want them to all be exactly the same sound. Honestly, that's going to sound very unnatural, so I don't necessarily want that. I'm going to have it change smoothly by percentage. I'm going to play with this, hit apply. Those changed. I'm not even going to play it. I know that's going to sound horrible. It's not so great. Let's scale it by 70%-ish. There you go. It just pulled everybody back, kind of maintained the relationship, but kind of lessened the difference, and just kind of scaled everything back. So now I should have a nice soft piano. Okay, just like a real piano, when you play harder, the sound gets brighter. So by pulling that velocity back, it feels like there was a more introspective introduction, and then they dug in when the tune starts. So you can absolutely use this to play and change the feel of the tune, even contribute to dynamics like making the track louder or softer at any given point. So you can totally change velocity. You can totally change the notes themselves. If there's a pitch bend, there's not any pitch bend in this particular track I'm giving you, but you can actually modify the pitch bend with the same way we modify automation. So yeah, you're going to see this thing that says SysX. It looks like SysX, which is creepy sounding. SysX is short for system exclusive. System exclusive messages are data that are embedded in a MIDI stream that are specific to the instrument. So they have weird keytars, the good old put it over your shoulder and play it like a guitar thing. Weird instruments like that have data that is specific to them, and that is called system exclusive information. That's what the SysX is. There is nothing special about anything we recorded in this track, so there is no SysX information in this particular track. Okay, so if I go in here, let's jump back out of here. We can also go back to notes. I'm going to actually jump back to clips. Give me one quick second. Okay, cool. So, sorry about that. They had to find some files around here. Okay, so if you're in note mode, you can control notes individually, but I don't want to control notes individually. I'm going to say I'm happy with the way things are. I'm going to hit clips. Clips allows you to deal with MIDI data in the same way you deal with audio data. So if I want to make a cut, I can highlight stuff and delete an entire chunk, and then it goes away, and I can grab this and I can move it around all I want. Okay? Now, you're also going to notice that there's a tail here. Why is this sticking out? That's because the notes actually started within the clip that I have here. So that's one thing that's interesting about MIDI is that you can make an edit. If I make this edit here, those 3 notes are staying because they started within the clip, right? Since it is data, it needs to know when to end. So it's going to leave it there. You can actually be, in a certain way, I guess you could say you could be a little sloppier with your edits on MIDI because of that. But it allows you to grab everything as a chunk and move it to wherever you need to. Or you can cut and paste, you can copy, you can do all that fun stuff. But you cannot get into individual notes when you are in clip view. Okay? There's another view you're going to find that's blocks. And blocks just doesn't show you anything. So I'm not quite sure what the value of that is. To be honest, this one is always... It's one of the Pro Tools mysteries I've never understood. Why would you not want to see the info in the track? That makes no sense to me. But that's what a block is for what that's worth. So I'm going to switch back to clips because it's more useful. Just like audio, if I drag this outward, the material comes back. So you haven't ever lost your MIDI data. You can always bring it back if you need to. Okay. Oh, I made my edit too quick. Okay, that's fine. You can pull it back out and you can get your notes, the notes back that you need to have back. Okay. So that's how you do some of your MIDI editing. You can move these notes around. You can do all sorts of fun stuff. You can also, of course, take that same, let's take that same intro that we've been playing with. And of course, that's not a good example. This isn't a good example because you don't have this plug-in there. But I can start saying, you know what? Maybe I don't like that. Maybe I prefer the organ on this track. Ah, that's something else I got to show you. Change the output here to the DB33.1. Right? So you can take the parts that already exist and you can make them a different instrument if you'd like. Now, there's something I need to show you that I accidentally showed you here. I'm going to go back to the piano track. So now I'm playing the piano again. But I said that if I put an instrument after the piano, it shouldn't hear anything, right? The organ is the only exception because the organ is not only the organ, but it's also an audio plug-in, and it's the Leslie cabinet. So on actual organs, on old school organs, you actually had a keyboard, and then you had what was called a Leslie cabinet. It's a big, tall wooden cabinet, kind of nondescript. I'm not even going to look up a picture of it. It's not that interesting to look at. Actually, you know what? I will, just in case you're wondering exactly what they look like, and you may have seen one before. There you go. You've probably seen something similar to this floating around somewhere. This is a good old B3 organ. You've heard it on hundreds, if not thousands, of recordings. And this is the Leslie speaker cabinet that comes with it. Now, what's harder to find a picture of is what's happening inside that Leslie speaker cabinet. It's not just a speaker cabinet. There's actually 2 sets of speakers in there. There's a horn in the top and there's a woofer in the bottom, and they spin. So you get this chorusing effect, this natural chorusing effect because they spin. So this piano sound kind of sounds like a chorus, right? Let me go to the organ because it's actually easier to hear on the actual organ track. But I'm playing the organ now. Whoops, I'm sorry, I gotta arm it, right? Why are we doing that? Oh, because it's not looking for my... There we go. It's still remembering the old keyboard that I used to actually record this track. So now I'm playing the organ. Now the organ, the top and the bottom of the Leslie cabinet spin at different speeds, so you can actually control the speed of it. So it's a really fun effect to play with. Now the thing, if you listen closely, it's not easily. You can say, well, I can copy that by just putting a like a vibrato or a chorus effect on my plugin on my effect and get the same thing. The thing that you're missing with a legitimate Leslie emulation is that the high frequencies and the low frequencies, which are represented by the horns and the woofers, are not spin. They don't speed at the same time. They actually, the lower one, the actual, whoops, there we go. The lower part of the Leslie, the part that has the woofer part of the Leslie part of the Leslie is bigger, and just because of physics, it'll spin, but when you tell it to slow down, it has so much momentum, it takes a while. But the horns, the higher part, are much smaller. So they'll start spinning really fast. And when you tell them to slow down, they slow down pretty quickly. But the low one has to catch up. And the same thing happens in reverse. If you ask it to speed up, the top one goes faster and the bottom one takes longer to get going. So that's why you have this interesting modulation that's different between your highs and your lows. If you listen closely, you can kind of hear that they're not totally in sync, and that's supposed to be like that. So when you put the DB33 in here, it actually acts as a plug-in. So even if we are playing the piano, it'll still go through this plug-in. So that is the one exception to the thing I showed you before. If I put vacuum in here, I will not hear the piano at all, because that's not a plug-in. That's another hint that if you want to use this on vocals or electric guitar, this is also a common thing that people use on electric guitar, although there's no electric guitar in this particular track. Yeah, I don't know that this would be the track to try it on the guitar, because the guitar is an acoustic on this. Vocals, people have put vocals through this. If you remember, if you've ever heard, oh, why am I drawing a blank? The last track on the Beatles' Revolver album, turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream. Crap, I can't remember the name of that song now. Hold on, I'm going to look it up because it's going to drive me freaking nuts for the rest of the day. Oh, forget you. Let me check real quick here. No, I don't have it on my laptop either. Oh, why is this driving me nuts? Normally anti-phone, but man, I gotta know this. This is gonna drive me nuts. Tomorrow Never Knows. That's the name of it. So, not right now, but later. Look up Tomorrow Never Knows. Oh, there it is. God, I can't spell. There we go. So you're looking for that. You're looking for that album cover, the pencil drawn one, and it's the last track. Tomorrow Never Knows, and John Lennon's vocal is running through a Leslie cabinet. They kicked the vocal mic out through the Leslie cabinet. It's a really cool effect. The entire song, his voice is going through that. I can't play it from Spotify because it'll shut down the stream because it'll catch the copyright. But when you're on your own time, go ahead and play that and check that out. So, okay. A little bit of a tangent about the DB83. Cool plugin, cool sound. The other thing you can do here is we also have, let me show you some of the other stuff that's actually on this track. Oops. Notice that I made the organ inactive, but since the MIDI was connected to the organ, the entire track has gone inactive. So now I need to be back here. I need to put myself back into the piano, and now the track is active again. So that's an interesting thing to be aware of. So there's a couple other things going on in this track as well. Okay, so you have strings. Now you'll notice that I have 2 tracks of strings, and that's intentional because they're not playing the same thing. So it actually gives you some control over the arrangement without having to edit all the MIDI. So they're really both the same thing, but they don't have to stay the same thing. So if you guys want to mess with this, you are totally down to mess with this. Now, this is Expand. This is a really useful plugin. Let me go to the one that we actually have soloed. Really useful plugin because, first off, there is a crap ton of sounds in this plugin. I mean, I'm not even a third of the way through. There's a ton of stuff in here. So you can totally go looking for whatever it is that you think you want to look for. They're fairly well, I think it's fairly intuitive in terms of searching through the presets. There's a bunch of stuff in here, and it's pretty easy to find the thing that you're looking for. So the other thing about this is that if you go in here, you can actually pull up more than one different sound at a time. So I could come in here and come up with some digital sawbrass, and I could put in, let's put in something weird. I don't know, let's put in an electric piano. And now, it's playing all 4 of these sounds at once. They're all playing the same thing, but you're playing 4 different sounds. You can pan them inside of that. You can change the level. There's effects. There's actually a hall reverb and a chorus. I can actually put effects inside the plugin. Like, you can do a crap ton just inside this plugin. You can even start messing with the attack decay, the ADSR stuff up here. You can change this stuff. If you really wanted to, you could actually come in here, and this says tuning fine. I could actually put stuff out of tune if I really wanted to. This is kind of fun to do, actually. Right? That is not appropriate for the song in any way, shape, or form, but it's something you can do. So this tune, I haven't really talked at all about what the tune is. The tune builds slowly throughout the entire tune, so you're still gonna have some audio work to do. Got a full drum kit. You have an acoustic guitar as the rhythm guitar. There is no electric guitar on this one. And the acoustic switches from playing kind of single notes to ends up being chordal. So you have to be careful with the compression that you use. You don't want to do too much in the beginning because it'll squash the end and vice versa. One hint I will give you about this track that kind of throws everybody for a loop is that the solo it's acoustic guitar, and it has a hard time cutting through all the strings and piano and bass and all the other stuff you have. I would recommend that when you do your mix, you start in the solo section. I normally would say you want to kind of start with the vocal, but start with the solo section to make sure that you have enough room for that guitar solo to fit through the mix, to cut through the mix. If you can get the rest of the instruments working so that the solo still works, then the rest of it should fall into place. But if you start at the beginning and you start working with all the keyboards and everything and you fill up all the space, this will come back to bite you. This will come back to get you. This is, like I said, this is always the hardest part for people, is trying to get this to work. So I would start in that particular spot. Last thing I need to say, and then that'll bring us perfectly to the end of our time, is that even though I left you the... I'm leaving you the Pro Tools file, the PTX file, because it has the MIDI in it. The downside is I just realized that it looks like there is some automation still stuck in here. So if you come here and you click on volume, it was fighting me. See how there's little nodes right here at the beginning? Go in and delete those. Actually, those are the beginning nodes. So why was it remembering my... Give me a quick second here. Okay, maybe I'm... Okay, maybe I'm wrong. I thought I saw something. Jump back when I tried to do it. So there is no automation in here. So forget what I just said. So yeah, it's fair game. Of course, you're gonna have to do some automation because we've already done some automation before. This track will definitely need it. So yeah, those are the tips. So when it comes to these MIDI stuff, I would like to see you guys experiment, especially with the string sound. And see if you can find something else that works. Like I said, you get to be a little bit of a producer this time. You can pick some of these keyboard sounds. You can pick different piano sounds. When you open up the Mini Grand, which I can't open from there. When you open up the Mini Grand, I know that mine won't open, but I think I can show you what I need to show you. Yes. So see right here, it says dynamic, and I know it's blurred out, but... Right here it says model. On the Mini Grand, you can switch between these 7 different models, and it dramatically changes the tone of the piano. So you can start there. You can play with the dynamics. What you don't see under here is there's actually a built-in reverb on that, on the piano as well. There's a level here. Leave the tuning in equal. Stretch tuning will sound funny, trust me. So leave that alone. But you can play with the model in there. You can obviously open up expand, and you've got, oh my God, you've got a million options in this thing. Experiment, have fun with this. You can do all sorts of really cool stuff, and this track can go in a couple different directions based on what you do. So go ahead and keep all of these. The piano tracks, I do need to mention, the reason the piano tracks are split up is because at the end, this piano track is meant to be... In the beginning, the piano track is kind of crucial, and it's kind of like the main thing. In the end, it's more of a special effect. So it's kind of like a background thing that should just kind of fill out sound, whereas for the rest of the track, the piano's important, and at the end, it's not. So that's why they're on 2 separate tracks. You could try a different sound on this. You can affect it. You can do whatever the heck you want. So that was the logic behind the way that this is recorded. The string parts give you the 2 different notes separately, and then the piano parts, one of them was meant to be like a main piano part. One was meant to be effects, kind of an effect, not an effect in terms of chorus, like a musical effect. So that was the drive behind that. So there you go. Brings Me Back Raw is the session you have. If you need help or if you want to just chat about something, I will get online on Thursday. But it's not going to be a required class. It's going to be a work day for you guys. So, cool. I'll jump back to the chat in case you need me before you go, but that would be it.